Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. I'm here today with art prof teaching artist Kat Huang and Eloise Sherrod. We are going to be talking today about whether you should go to art school. I know a lot of people are already thinking about admissions for next year, so hopefully we can give you guys some insight into art school and what you might want to consider. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques and tutorials. All right, this question of should I go to art school? It's not an easy one, I think, for a lot of people to figure out, and it's oftentimes not a decision to make quickly. So that's why I think it's good for us to start talking about it now. Kat, how did you know you wanted to go to art school? Was there any defining experience that told you that you should go?
Not really. I just think my whole life I was gearing up towards something art related. So it just made a lot of sense for me after high school to pursue that. And for me, that was art school. That was my answer.
I mean, Kat, did you ever consider at any point going to a liberal arts college or a larger university, or were you just totally focused on art school programs alone?
I was totally focused on art programs. I felt like that was what I was best at, and that was where I could thrive in.
Okay, so for you, the decision was pretty straightforward, not a lot of back and forth. For you,
Right.
Eloise, was it obvious that you wanted to go to art school or not?
Definitely not. In fact, I was also actively discouraged by several people I knew from even applying. Um, and I think the only art school that I applied to was, in fact, the one I ended up going to. And I applied almost only to liberal arts colleges aside from that.
And so, how did you make that decision that, okay, I should, even though I'm being discouraged, to apply to art school? Did something happen? Did somebody say something to you?
It was almost like I had been working on the application because, like, art was this very important thing for me, and then I sort of was like, okay, well, let me try and see what happens. And then over the course of working on that portfolio, I realized it was what I actually wanted to be doing. Like, the act of putting the portfolio together and actively imagining myself at art school was what made me realize I wanted to do it. Like, I had to actually envision myself there because there weren't a lot of people envisioning me there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, myself included, before I went to art school, I really did not have artist friends at all. I mean, I had friends in high school, but none of them were artists. None of them were into the stuff that I wanted to do. And so I think it is really hard to have those experiences to make you realize, okay, number one, there are other people out there who are as into this as you are. And number two, that this really could be something that's very viable and really could be a good fit for you. So it's very tricky because I think a lot of people don't really have the experiences they need to really be able to troubleshoot whether it would be a good experience or not. Annie Helgelson is saying trying an art class outside of high school can be a good way to see if the academic side of the art world is for you without the commitment. What do you think about that, Kat? Did you take any art classes outside of high school?
Um, Not okay, actually, yes, I did take a summer program at an art school. That definitely counts. I took it at, I think it was like, I think it was the California Institute of the Arts. And that just reaffirmed my decision that I didn't want to go to Cal Arts. That's what it's called. But I still wanted to go to art school. So even though you make the decision that, yes, I do want to go to art school, there are many different kinds of art schools that you could be applying to. So they're really, it's a maze. It's a maze.
Oh, I know. I mean, just within art schools alone, if you go to Cal Arts, that's a totally different experience than if you go to MICA, which is in Baltimore.
Right.
And so it's really hard, I think, to make that prediction. Neil is saying, what bothers me is not much if I quote want, but if I quote can. So, Eloise, what'd you say to that? Because I totally understand that point of view. Because if you're in high school, you haven't had decades of experience making artwork, chances are you probably have not been able to enroll in a super rigorous art program that's going to give you everything you need. And so where do you find that drive to say, you know what, I can do this. This can actually happen, especially because you were not super encouraged by everybody around you to do it.
How do I put this? Spite was a very important motivating factor for me. There were people who I was convinced I needed to prove wrong, and then it sort of transformed over the course of that time into something much more wholesome and love and positivity. But I'm a big believer in the fact that whatever I'm a bigger believer in actions and results than necessarily in what motivates them, because I think that people come to these decisions from all kinds of places in their life, and what you end up with as a result is not necessarily what you set out to accomplish, and it can still be one of the most positive things to happen to you. And that's what this experience was. I can't imagine who I would be if I'd made a different decision in my education. But I really respect and iterate that it is not for everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, so Kat, how would you say you would describe to somebody why art school maybe wouldn't be the right fit? Because that's something I really try to explain to people, is that art school, it's not that, oh, your skill set determines if you should go. It's not that. It's just, is it a good fit? The way I describe college admissions, I say, look, it's like dating, okay? It's just, is this the right person for you? It's not person A is better than person B. It's just, is this a good fit? So who do you think is a good fit for art school? How would you describe somebody that you think would be a good fit?
Oh my gosh, that's so dependent. That's so dependent on like what kind of school and what kind of person you are as well.
Well, why don't you talk about it from your point of view?
My point, there's one thing that I think for sure is a good teller if you should go to art school or not, is if you can really dedicate your life to it. I had a lot of friends who went into art school going like, oh, but I'm so very passionate about like literature, or like I actually knew this girl who ended up being like a mathematician in the end. Like she went to my school, art school, and she ended up transferring out because she was like, industrial design is great, but I like numbers far more than I anticipated. So, and she really thought that she would do math for like the rest of her life. And I thought, okay, that's cool. You can't really just like go to art school and just think, oh, I'll have art will be a side thing. That's not possible. You really have to be dedicated in some form of art.
Well, I'll tell you guys, when I was in high school, I was super active in athletics. I was a hardcore volleyball player. I was a really active musician. I played the oboe in all these orchestras, and I was practicing all the time. When I got to RISD as an art school student, all that disappeared. Okay, and I know that sounds a little bit depressing. Okay, it sort of was for a little bit, but in some ways it did streamline my experience as a student, because it really was the first time that I truly focused on my work. Because I feel like by comparison, what I was doing in high school really felt like I was skimming the surface in a way. And so, you know, if you want to gain something, you somewhat have to give something up. But I would say if you can't picture yourself maybe taking a break from some of those other activities, and you feel that that really is a problem for you, art school probably isn't a good fit, because art schools don't really make a lot of space for that. Although, I don't know, Eloise, did you have time for anything that was extracurricular when you were at art school that was not part of your studio classes?
I did, probably to the detriment occasionally of my studio classes. I was really involved in my school's theater community, and that sort of became my another creative family, in some ways closer than the community that I found in my major, who were all wonderful people. But there was something about the fact that we were all artists we were all working in different mediums, but coming together for a shared purpose. That was really powerful about that. But I think that the people who I am a big believer in the fact that, like, when you go to art school, you are going to be focusing in on that time, and you are there to really like streamline that part of your education. But that art is informed by so many other things out in the world and having your mind stimulated by so many other parts. So just because you necessarily put that on hold as your focus for that time during art school doesn't mean that other forms of learning and education are not going to inform your artistic practice after that.
And it doesn't mean that those things that you say put aside temporarily while you're in art school can't come back into your life. Because I actually ended up doing quite a bit of music at Brown University because Brown has this relationship with RISD. So I got really lucky that I actually had a situation like that worked out. But after I got out of art school, I started playing with all these community orchestras. And so it's not like it's gone forever. It's just on hold for a little bit. And so the question is, are you willing to do that? Because I know people who I would work with at pre-college programs in the summer, high school students, and I would say things to them like, oh, well, how is the pre-college program going for you? What's it like to be doing art 24/7? And some people would say to me, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I want more, which sounds insane because I'm already doing it all day. Okay, so that's one reaction. Another reaction is, yeah, I love it. It's great. I'm learning so much, but I really miss reading Shakespeare's plays on the side. There's always something, you know? And I say to those people, you know, if you're feeling that little tug of those chemistry books or whatever it is that you're reading, that's probably a sign that you need to go to a bigger university that's going to offer more options than an art school. We got a question from Joelle. Anyone else want to go to art school but is worried about money? Yeah, that's a big concern. And I know especially right now, because of the coronavirus situation, all the schools, I know a lot of them haven't even decided what is going to be happening in the fall. There's a lot of unanswered questions going on right now. We don't tend to give a lot of advice about that because people's financial situations, it's super personal, and I don't feel qualified to comment on issues like that. But if you guys want to talk with each other within the chat, just to commiserate with each other, I think that's very valuable. And also remember, we do have the Art Prof Discord, and there is a whole channel dedicated for high school students. So I'm sure you can find other people there who can definitely talk to you about some of those concerns as well. Salty Person says, why are schools canceling art? Do they not think it's important? Kat, do you want to shed some light on why oftentimes the art programs are sort of the first things to go?
I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of something that you see not just in schools, but just around the world. Art is always placed second. And that's just like the unfortunate reality of it all. People always don't, normally people don't usually put that first. And yeah, I guess it's not like you need it to like live physically, like it's not like eating or drinking water or something or sleep or something like that, but I do think it's important for culture, and like it's really unfortunate that people put it second, but that's just the way it goes in the world.
Well, I have to tell you guys, I feel like it's more important than ever because people are stuck inside. They have so much time on their hands, and I feel lately, since the lockdown started, at least in the US, we definitely have been in way more demand, more than ever. And I have to say, I think that is definitely related. Let's see. John Murph is saying, does art school teach you how to sell your art? Eloise, why don't you take that one? What do you think about that?
Depends on the program.
Yeah.
I did not learn a lot about the business of working in film while I was studying film. That was mostly stuff that I learned through a lot of hard lessons and occasional mentorship after college. But there are some programs that are much more industry oriented than the one that I chose to go to. And that's one of the reasons that you really need to do your research. I mean, I am satisfied with the education that I got, but other people might not have been. And so it's really important to look at what courses are being offered, what the post-graduation job placement is, like what people are doing. Are they working as professional animators at Pixar, or are they in academia and making their own like independent films? Like those are important distinctions.
Well, and Eloise, I feel that this comparison you're giving in film is a really good example of it, because I've seen film programs that are so much about the filmmaker as a whole person, and that you as the filmmaker, you conceive of it, you make it, you execute it, it's all your thing. And there are other programs where they really are training you for one particular position within a very specific industry. And there are pros and cons to both of those. I mean, it really just depends on your preference. Some people really want to work in the industry, some people really don't. But that's, again, where you really do have to do your research. Kat, do you feel like you got information about how to sell your art or some business stuff when you were in art school?
My position is pretty similar to Eloise. I did not learn as much in school as I wish I could have. It was mostly something that I had to really go out into the field and experience on my own through like hardships and other experiences. But again, it really depends on the program and it really depends on the school you go to. So that's why you really should reach out to the students or even faculty that are in those schools and see sort of like what is the school culture there? What are they trying to prepare you for?
Well, I have to say, though, that I think across the board, this is my experience because I've taught at a bunch of different art schools and also liberal arts colleges. I do feel, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a culture of never wanting to talk about money ever in art school. People are really terrified of it as a subject, or they pretend they don't care about it. And as somebody who has advised many students and past students on how to sell in business and all that type of stuff, I find that pretty frustrating because I don't think it's that responsible to send students out in the world and never tell them you got to get a contract. That's such a basic idea. I mean, it's like, fine, it's different if you're a filmmaker or a freelance illustrator, but students really should know that. And I have people calling me up saying, Clara, I didn't get a, I'm like, oh no, like I feel for students that have that experience. On the other hand, though, the other part of me knows that you don't really know until it actually happens. I don't know, Eloise, what do you think about that?
You will not realize you need a contract until someone screws you over. And then you're never going to forget that ever again.
And the thing is, you can't really explain that to somebody when they're in school. Because the thing is, I had to teach a senior seminar class for the printmaking department at RISD. I taught it twice. And there were so many concepts that I really wanted them to grasp that quite honestly just didn't make a lot of sense. It's like trying to explain to somebody what it's like to have kids intellectually, like this is what it's like to have. You don't know until you actually have the kid. So it's sort of that type of thing. So to a certain degree, yes, I do think art schools should work harder at that. On the other hand, I also sort of feel like it's unfair for students to say they should have taught me all these other things. So it's a very complicated thing to consider. Valeria is saying, what's the most productive use of time during a gap year before art school? Eloise, why don't you reflect on that?
Yeah, so I actually took a gap year, not before art school, but in the middle of art school. I had to take time off. I mean, just school in general was kind of intense. And then I was also having some health problems. I spent that year doing a combination of working in my industry and doing internships, and then also preparing myself mentally for what it would mean to go back for one more year where I would have permission to focus on me as opposed to focusing on someone else's agenda or projects. And I think reflecting on like getting real world experience is a very helpful and productive thing to do during a year off, a gap year, because it makes you appreciate what that education is more.
For sure. I think that gap years can be really, really good experiences for people. I mean, it's really specific to the person. It's not always a good idea for everybody, but I think it can be a really good use of your time. Veronica is, oh, I'm sorry, Kat, I'm sorry. I'm looking at all these screens and windows. You're like waving at me. Why don't we hear from you?
I took a gap year before school, and I can just tell you it really depends on what you need to do at that moment. The reason why I took my gap year was because I was not sure if I wanted to have my higher education experience in the US. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in the US or abroad. So I took that year and I tried living alone in France for a while. Like I didn't know French, and I was like, I guess now's the time to learn. And I went there and I learned French and I was like, I wonder if I would want to go to school here. And in the end, I decided to go to school in the US. But I really needed to take that gap year to find myself and really understand, like, because art school is going to change your life in some way or form. And I wanted to be really sure that the trajectory in the US was the one I wanted to take, like, 4 years of my life in.
Let's see. Veronica says, how much do art schools provide meetings or communication with people in the industry? Eloise, why don't you reply to that?
Depends on the program. I know it's such a cop-out answer, but it's true. And this is another situation of needing to do your research. Like, is there a career office? Do they have regular programming? Like, what kind of databases do they have access to? What does the alumni network look like? Look up who went to that school beforehand, because those are the people who are going to be invited to your school to review portfolios, who are going to be brought in to, like, give master classes. So do your research.
Well, you can do your research, but another thing to consider too is that certain schools, I think, are more or less proactive than others. And yeah, it's a mixed bag. It really, really depends. I taught at Wellesley College for a few years. They have the most incredible alumni network, you guys. These people are jazzed about being alumni, and they are so supportive of the school, of the students. I just was like blown away by their alumni network. Like, that network really stood out to me in a way that some of the other networks maybe weren't so clear about. But I think I hear this question a lot about art school, where people say, well, if I go to this school, am I going to get a job? And I just think that that mindset is probably a big mistake, because ultimately they're not going to come to you. I mean, Kat, when you've had to get jobs or whatever in the past, I mean, did RISD show up at your door and say, here, Kat, take your pick? Like, what was it like when it came down to it? I mean, RISD has career services, they have all the staffing and everything, but when it comes down to it, it really is in your hands. I don't know. What do you think, Kat?
Great. I think ultimately it is up to luck, but there are ways to make yourself luckier. And the way to make yourself luckier is by applying to as many things as you can or working really hard for it. I applied to many, many things. I ultimately did get something. But again, I think it was like luck, but there were ways that I made myself luckier because I got that through a contact. And it was through the work that I had made, and the contact knows that I've worked hard, that they connected me to this opportunity. And so again, it's really lucky. You can't just like go to school thinking, oh, I'll get a job at the end. No, it's like, it's very up in the air, like life is.
Well, you know something, I've got a lot of students who usually contact me in the spring and they say, oh, I got into all these schools and I can't decide between school A and school B. And so much of the time they say to me, which school is going to get me a better job? And I say, neither. You're going to be the one that gets the job. I mean, you could go to Harvard, you could go to Yale, and you could do nothing. It really is so much more in your hands and what you do with that experience. I don't know. What do you think, Eloise?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's exactly what you put into it. That's what I think.
I also like want to mention that I actually know people who didn't go to art school who ended up getting like similar jobs and positions that I have as well. And that is like just a completely different life route. Like the person I know has just like worked for a decade freelance and just like worked their ass off. Sorry, am I allowed to say that word? Am I allowed to say curse word? But ultimately, it really is what you put into it.
Let's see. Veronica is, oh, sorry, wrong question. Analia says, do you think selling your art makes it lose some of its symbolic value? All right. Well, Eloise, what do you think about that? Does something happen to you when you sell that work? Does something change?
I think that we live in a world in which people are required to exchange money for goods and services and food and housing, and that it may change your relationship to your work, but to your artwork, but there's nothing to like inherently negative about selling your artwork in order to sustain yourself. That's I think there's an attitude in a lot of art schools, which I personally find to be very unhealthy, which is very like, oh, but you know, this like undervalues, like don't, I mean, and I think that it's completely valid and like an important option to have to choose to like go and maybe more of like a community art direction or like to make the decision not to try to earn a living off of your artwork. But I don't think that we necessarily benefit ourselves as an artistic community in general by like looking down on people who are trying to like get by.
Well, because ultimately, we gotta eat. And unless you're a trust fund baby, there's no chance you're gonna get around that. You're gonna have to deal with that, I think, at some point. Aviva Lucas is saying, how do you feel about art schools versus universities that offer degrees BA, not BFA in art? What do you think, Kat?
Well, I think they're different. Again, you have to do your research. But when it comes to an art school, they're very much focused on like art. When it comes to a university that offers a degree in art, but also like in a bunch of other things, maybe if you're the kind of person who wants to like try a bit of everything, that could be the right route for you. But if you really, it really depends on your focus. Like maybe if you want to double major in like, I don't know, literature and glass, then maybe a university that just offers that degree would be fine. But again, do your research.
Aviva, for me, I think the biggest difference that I could give you from a class point of view in terms of a university experience in an art school is that when I taught at Wellesley College, I would teach a drawing class, and the drawing class was 5 hours each week. But you know what the big difference was? It was on 2 separate days. So on Tuesday, I would teach for 2.5 hours, and then I would see them again on Thursday for 2.5 hours. Now, when I taught at RISD, I saw the students for 5 hours also once a week, but I only saw them once. And I'll tell you, that is a huge difference in terms of how you feel as a student, because things are just so much more consolidated. And so I did feel, even as a teacher, when I was teaching at the university, that it was more about broadening your exposure to a lot of different things. You couldn't really do that like really deep dive because you just weren't given the schedule that would make that happen. I mean, when you have to sit with a drawing for 5 hours, that's a really long time. And if you're sitting with it for 2.5 hours, it's not a long time by comparison. And so I think I would think about how you learn and whether you respond better to that diversity of exposure, or if you really want that super focused mastery approach. Maybe that's one way to think about that. Let's see. Anjusha says, can you actually be more successful after art school? Can you explain a little bit more, Anjusha, what you mean by that? Because I'm not so sure I totally understand your question, and we'll get back to you. Joelle is saying, what should you research about a school to know if it's a good fit? Okay, well, we've talked about alumni networks. We've talked about faculty and the programming. Eloise, what else should be on that checklist?
What kinds of scholarships and financial aid are available? Definitely. Along with tuition, that's got to factor into your calculation. I think that you should also, if you can, like an important form of research is research where you are going out and experiencing. So if they have an open house, go see if you could attend that open house and see if you like get along with the people in the crowd. Like see if you can see yourself surrounded by these people who all want to go to the school and with other students who are at the school who are at those events.
Kat, any other features to research on an art school?
I think I would also take a look into like the communities in the school as well, because I don't know, maybe if you're, let's say, hypothetically you're an international student, you probably want to be in company with other international students as well, or at least people who can relate to your experiences, and to see like if the student body or the faculty can provide that support network as well.
I would really emphasize, Joelle, the people, because I don't know about you and Eloise, Kat, but I feel like a lot of students get very hung up on, oh, well, this school, they have an amazing glass facility, and oh, the print shop is so big, and I'm like, great, but what if the teachers are terrible? It's like, it doesn't matter how pretty your print shop is if you don't have a really good, strong community. And so what I would do, I mean, I couldn't even do this when I went to art school. There was no Instagram. I mean, I would have been hyper stalking every single art school student on Instagram and seeing what type of work they made and how they talk about the work. And I would stalk all the faculty and see if they post stuff about their assignments. I would really do a deep dive into the people, because the people are really what make a school. Yeah, it's nice to have a good cafeteria, and it's great when you can have sushi for lunch. Those are all good little perks. But I feel like ultimately it's the personalities that really define a school. So as much as you can do there, I think is really, really helpful. Alyssa Avocado says, I've never had access to any school classes relating to what I want my art major to be. Is applying straight to an art school a good idea? Eloise, what do you think about that?
If you feel like you have a developed enough practice that you can show in a portfolio, if you feel like you have a body of work, it doesn't all have to be the same kind of work, but if you feel like you have enough to be able to show yourself off, I don't see why not. I mean, like, one of the reasons that we have Art Prof is because we are trying to make quality art education accessible to people who don't necessarily have access to art classes for whatever reason. And we certainly hope that people are able to produce bodies of work as a result of our channel that would be just as comparable if they were actually attending a class.
Well, and I also know, Alyssa, that when I got to art school, there's such a broad range of experiences. I mean, I was very lucky that I had gone to a summer pre-college program, and I had a lot of experience in tons of different art classes outside of my high school. And so I was actually probably one of the better prepared students to go to art school. Now, my husband didn't do any of that. And he said he came in, it just was totally blindsided because he felt like, oh my gosh, everybody else here has done all this stuff and I'm so behind. But you know what? You catch up. It's okay. I mean, eventually things level off and you will settle in. I don't know, Kat, did you feel that there was a really disparate difference in terms of skills with your peers?
I actually did think that there was like a really big difference in skills between peers, but ultimately we all got into the same school, which means that we had the potential to do something. And I remembered my senior show, or like the final gallery event I had before I graduated, like the people in my group, all of our skills were extremely different as well, but we all wanted to be in a group together. And I think it's because, like, yes, some people are lacking in some skills, but I think they more than make up for it in other skills as well. And you know what? Like, 4 years is a while. During that time, hopefully you can also like beef up the parts that you aren't feeling that confident in as well.
Let's see, Anjusha got back to us, and they are saying, I mean, can self-taught artists also get as many opportunities in art like people with a degree, or will they be looked down upon? What do you think, Eloise?
I think you're always going to run into people who are super elitist and will judge you for not having like certain credentials, but like art history and the contemporary art world is full of people who came to their artistic practice from like all sorts of different paths. Like, Kat, you were just talking about your coworker who just ended up freelancing for years and now has like a very similar job to the one that you have. And I think that there's no right way to do this.
I don't know, Kat, have you seen people really being rude and snotty about that? Or do you think that there are situations where people just really could care less.
I just feel like anyone who's rude and snotty like that are just like nasty people to be around in general. And it's just, I mean, I guess like the name of a school certainly helps, but I think it's also not fair to look at an artist's portfolio before judging whether they can do art or not, because ultimately, is the work you make good? Like you could have a degree, you can also have a terrible portfolio at the same time. And like, guess who's going to be picked in that case? Whoever has a better portfolio, whoever has clearly applied themselves to their work.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, and in a way, we sort of have an advantage in this particular field because the actual like action, like the actual product, if you will, is ultimately the only thing that matters, right? It doesn't necessarily really matter how many lines you have on your CV. I mean, it does to some people, but like really what matters is if you can.
Well, I'm going to step in and say that the one place where people are really going to give you a hard time about it is if you want to teach at the college level. That is the one little place in the art world where people will be horrible about it and extremely judgmental and very elitist. And I can't stand it. It bothers me so much. And I think it's a real problem. So I would just say, if you are somebody you do want to eventually teach at the college level, that is a place where you do have to get that degree. You can't just get a job teaching at a university level. I think in the 70s you could pull that off. Back then, I think they had not any search committees or any of these tiered interviews or anything. It was fine, but now people are very uptight about that. But I would say in other circumstances, when it's really just about the work, I mean, if I ran a gallery and I look at somebody's work, do I care where they went to school, or do I care if the work is going to look great and is it going to sell? I think that matters way more. So I would say mostly it doesn't matter that much, except for that one place that I'm talking about. And then you got to say to yourself, if everybody's like that, do you want to be there? So it's like, maybe that's not a good fit anyway. So it really depends on the person. Okay, sorry, this person has a Japanese name. I can't pronounce it, but they're asking, do you consider the environment of an art school to be important? Kat, what do you think?
Yes. I do think it's important because like the whole reason why I want to go to art school is to be surrounded by other artists. And I don't know, it's just like when you are in art school, you basically live, breathe, eat, sleep art. You really can't escape from it. And that's what I signed up for when I signed up for art school.
And by the way, you guys, we do have this playlist on YouTube. It's called Artist Wellness. And we have a whole bunch of videos that all talk about artist communities and why they're important, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, they're important. But I think until you really have had a couple of key experiences, it's not so easy to visualize in your head. So I really recommend watch these streams because I think they'll really help you guys quite a bit. And Tammy is saying, I'm curious how many people over 30 go back to art school? Is it a group of all different ages? Eloise, what was your experience? Were most people in art school your age, or did you see older students around?
Most people in my undergraduate cohort were around my age, which was like late teens, early 20s, but we definitely did have people who were over 30 coming to do that degree after a long time doing other work and living their lives. Grad students definitely tend to be much more across the board. Some people go to grad school right out of their BFA. I'm not personally a fan of that, but it is the right thing for some people. And then some people have like entirely different careers and then decide at age 50 that they want to go get an MFA.
Kat, what about you? Did you encounter lots of students of different ages?
I mean, pretty similar to Eloise. Most of the people around me were my age, like early teens. Late teens, early 20s. But I actually did find some students who are like over the age of 30 also pursuing BFAs. Like I knew someone who was like around 40 something pursuing their BFA in textiles, which was pretty cool to see.
Guys, we have an art prof share today, which I'm excited to show you guys. We are going to look at this still life drawing by Brenda Zurita. And Brenda's artist statement is in the video description below. So if you guys want to take a look at that, and you can also check out Brenda on Instagram. Yellow Hat Arts. And so Brenda explains that I've never drawn a still life in my life before I saw the Art Prof video talking about how to make one at home. And I suddenly became very curious to try it out. And it was honestly the best thing ever. A lot of people think you need fancy stuff to make one, but you really don't. So if you don't know the tutorial, it's this tutorial here where I demonstrate how to assemble, how to light a still life. I talk about composition and color and thumbnail sketches, and we do it using Caran d'Ache crayons, so you guys can check that out if you want. And Brenda also explains, I learned so much about experimenting with the light source, how to have a good angle, what colors to use in the still life, but most importantly, the placement of the items. I will definitely do this more often. Thanks again for the great content. Well, Kat, we've got this great shot that Brenda sent us of her drawing on the easel. We've got the still life in the background. What's your take on this?
Oh, wow. The first time doing a still life, I think this is wonderful. I especially really like the, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it now. Complementary colors. That's such a basic term and I forgot it. Sorry. I love the complementary colors, the red and the green, and also just like that spot of the blue candle as well. And I love the different textures. So for a first time still life, I think this is actually really well executed.
Eloise, what do you think of Brenda's drawing? How did she do?
I like the pasta.
I like the pasta too. Why do we all like the pasta so much?
It's great. I don't know. It's like unusual. And I think that is part of like what actually makes it a special piece for me. It sticks out. It is memorable.
It kind of looks like a mixture of like things you would do on a romantic night.
Yeah, bottle of wine.
Pasta.
Candlelight.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, I think it just really shows that you don't need something super fancy to get a really engaging still life. I mean, I'll tell you guys, when I look at this, the colors are so vibrant. I mean, that lime green is just stunning. It's just leaping out at us in that like velvety red that's behind it and the way the candle is just nestled in there. I just think you did an amazing job with this, Brenda. So keep making these because I think that there's a whole world of objects out there for you to play with. And I think you've really seen how still lives really begin with the setup. It's not the drawing part that begins the process. It's the picking of the items, it's the lighting, it's how you arrange them. And I think, Brenda, you did a great job of that. So really, really nice. So if you guys watch one of our videos and you make something or learn something that you think is helpful and you would like to share, go to artprof.org and click on tutorials. If you go to the purple button, it will take you to the Art Prof Share submission form, and you guys can check that out. Maybe you will find yourself like Brenda. Oh, Brenda is here in the live chat with us. Wonderful. So Brenda is saying, oh my God, I'm blushing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Brenda, because my art teacher heart just surges when I see you guys making this stuff. It's just the most satisfying, concrete evidence of somebody learning from our content. And it's just amazing to see that. And Brenda, I believe that you are in Mexico as well. And the fact that we're reaching people who are really, really far away from us, I think is really quite remarkable. So great job. And by the way, if you don't want to submit and make it all formal like that for a shout out, you can also just tag us on Instagram. So art.prof, use hashtag artprofshare, and we'd love to see what you guys are doing. We are going to head over to Discord in about 5 minutes or so because we got some secret art prof stuff to talk about. Not really. We just want to talk about guinea pigs, right? So anyway, we'll be over there on Discord in a little bit if you guys want to chat with us there for a little bit and subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And Brenda says, I love this community. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Mexican. And thank you, Gina, for the super chat. Really appreciate your support, you guys. And again, thank you to our top Patreon supporters who make everything that we do here at Art Prof possible. Thank you, you guys, for tuning in to the stream. Everybody, stay safe. We'll see you next time.